Welcome, David.
Good morning.
If you're not familiar with Two Sigma, it is a financial sciences company that applies technology and big data to areas like wealth, investment management, private equity, insurance. But we also invited David to help kick us off today because he speaks with such insight about the future of tech and the frictions that tech is causing with society. And David, there are a lot of frictions today. I just wonder why, we're at the precipice of amazing advancements in AI and quantum computing. We have the world at our fingertips via these smartphones. Why aren't we enjoying this moment more?
That's a great question and doesn't have an easy answer, but I would probably focus on a couple of key aspects of our world today. First of all, things are changing very quickly. I think of the world as being an exponential world where, because of network effects and connectivity, when the telephone was first invented, it took really decades before it had a real impact on how business was conducted, how you conducted your lives. When Facebook was invented, it basically came to dominate global communication in a fraction of that amount of time. And so in the past, when technological changes occurred, society could adjust to these changes gradually, but today we don't really have the ability to adjust. In fact, it's just happening faster than you can react. And this gives us less time to plan for the changes. For example, and I could go on about this for the entire time we're together, education today is not really tuned up to reflect what you really need to know to thrive in our society. Another problem is that because the world is changing so quickly, you need continuous education. You can't just complete your education with high school or college and think that what you've learned will take you through the next 30 years of your life. Because in those 30 years, everything's going to completely change multiple times. So your education will be out of date in no time at all. And we're not equipped for this kind of continuing education. There's a lot more to say.
Yeah, so we're going to come back to that. Government has a responsibility to prepare people, and companies maybe need to do a better job. But there's also a sense that all this dramatic change is going to intensify. And I want to talk to you about AI. I've heard you talk about this in the past, and this idea that it will bring about a great displacement of workers. Do you believe that?
Well, yes. I don't think it's going to eliminate work, but it will change. In fact, it has already significantly changed the nature of work for so many people. I think one worry about AI, by the way, and I think this is in fact leading to, people may not entirely recognize this, but leading to dissatisfaction in society is related to who is making the decisions and how are decisions being made. Any of you that are a parent know that it is not a good idea to make all the decisions for your kids. If you're literally just telling them what to do and they don't understand why you're telling them these things, they're going to revolt. They're going to feel unhappy. A good parent should be teaching people, your kids, among other things, how to make good decisions. Now, today we're moving into an algorithmic world where increasingly decisions are being made automatically for us, often behind the scenes, in a way that we don't understand. And rather than create human agency, it's taking it away. And so it's the same kind of effect that we don't really feel like we're as vested in our society as we should be. With regard to your question of work, the same issue is being created where there's a tension that's occurring between the role of people in a process and the machines in that process. How do they work together and collaborate to essentially make better decisions?
So that's interesting. We're all the children feeling sort of vaguely disenfranchised by the invisible algorithms that are guiding our lives.
And just like you can be a very manipulative parent and try to sort of influence your kids' behaviors in ways that the kids don't understand, and I think that that's really genuinely what algorithms and AI are, and look, I'm not overgeneralizing here, but to some extent, this is clearly happening in our society. I think that most of you have felt one time or another that you have been manipulated by an algorithm.
Well, and it's not just disenfranchisement. I think there's a sort of sense that the fruits of this change are being very unequally distributed. Is that an inevitable part of change and technology disruption?
It might be. No one ever said that capitalism, without any rules at all, will lead to a level playing field. Look, if you read a history book about capitalism and the evolution of society, you do get these periods, particularly around change, that leads to concentration of wealth or outcomes that are not necessarily good for society overall. So we are in the midst of, really, I would argue, a greater revolution than maybe even the initial industrial revolution. Yet we have not adjusted in any way the rules of our society. And some people argue that there's no need to adjust anything, that let's just let the market will do the right thing. Don't worry about it. But that might be true, but in the past it has always not been true. Maybe it'll be true going forward, but give me more evidence.
Well, so what do you make of some of the proposed solutions, like a universal basic income?
Well, it depends why you want to do it. So I think that one of the lucky advantages that I consider myself to be very lucky, and I could give you a big list of all the good luck I've had, but I think one of the most important lucky things I had was throughout my childhood and even during my graduate school days, I never had to worry about earning money. And so thanks to the US government who paid for a lot of my education, thanks to my parents who worked hard for me to pay for my college education, I didn't work, they were middle class, but they worked hard to do it. I could focus on my career development for a long time. I actually spent 8 years in grad school. I'm wondering what I was doing. But it really, if I had to point to, the couple of things that made it possible for me to do well in society, I would say it's what my parents did for me, setting the right pathways, and making it so I didn't have to worry about money back then. And then my days in grad school at MIT, and the fact that I didn't have to worry about money either. And so one of the benefits, so I actually had a universal basic income up until when I was 30 years old. And so, I can't say that if I were critical of the idea of giving people resources to develop themselves, that would be, I would be, not acknowledging that I had that all myself. Now, on the other hand, you have to have the right balance here because you also, want to encourage people to work. And so I think it's an extremely complicated question, but I just wanted to acknowledge that I myself had a UBI, up until I was like 29.
Well, would you support it, or is it impractical and too costly?
It really depends on how it's being done. I think that, I don't think that you can just do it without any restrictions of any kind. Yep. But I think that we want to invest in our future, in people. The key, if we want to have a great outcome over the next generation, we have to keep investing in people. We have to remember that human beings have unique talents. Human beings have potential that AI and machines do not have today. We shouldn't be depressed that in the next 10 years or even the next 30 years that we will be completely obsolete because AI will do everything we do better. I don't believe that for 1 minute, even though I'm very enthusiastic about all the advances in AI. So if we assume that people are actually not obsolete, we're not obsolete, you should be happy to hear it, then we should want to invest in people.
And you mentioned education, and not just a broad-based education, but very specifically a computer science education. You've called coding the new literacy. It feels like the education system and people's kind of own personal ambitions have yet to catch up to that reality.
Well, again, I'm going to go back to what are the tools to equip people to succeed today. I think, and this is just this is not supported by any kind of research, but my intuition tells me that people that understand the world that they live in become more excited about opportunities in the world. And so when I was a kid, I was rebuilding car engines because, I wanted to understand how they worked. And that got me interested in engineering. I was also building computers as a kid, and I understood how they worked. And so my ability to connect with the world around me got me super interested in, my education and the potential future. Now imagine today's generation. So you have maybe an iPhone, and many people will look at this iPhone as the ultimate black box. They have no idea what's going on. It is impenetrable to them. It is some kind of crazy device that was dropped down from a Star Trek set, and it's performing these amazing things, but you don't know what's going on. Well, why would that make you interested in going to school? You feel that this is something only a couple, the top 1% can understand. It's inaccessible. So it creates essentially a division in society between those people that can understand how the modern world is working, which today is not very many, and then all the rest that are essentially left behind. If you understand how the world is working, and I was fortunate enough to have the right background and the right experiences, that I really had a better understanding than most. Not because I'm smart, but I was lucky. I was at the right places to be able to get this. Then you have a big advantage. So to give more people that advantage, we have to get people curious about the world again. And one way to get kids curious about the world is to expose them to coding, which is really, truly a new literacy. And if you do that, I'm not really concerned about having every kid wanting to be a software engineer. That's not the point. The point is we want every kid to understand the power of computers and to imagine what they can do. And maybe other people will be writing the software, but they at least should understand what they can do with it. And to understand what you can do with it, you have to understand to some extent how it actually works. My foundation actually, for 10 years, has been backing what's now the world's largest effort to teach kids how to code. If you have kids, go to the website scratch.mit.edu, which is in the last year, over 200 million kids have gone to the website, and every day kids create 500,000 new projects, coding projects. Typical age is 5th, 6th grade. And so it's efforts like this that will get the new generation excited about what they can do.
David, I want to shift the conversation somewhat. We're in this remarkable moment in Washington, D.C. and states across the country where the regulatory targets are pointed squarely at the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon. How important is it in this bundle of solutions to smooth out the frictions between tech and society to curb the power of big tech, to regulate these new services?
Well, I think that let's just talk about other industries really for one moment. Healthcare, aviation, finance. Okay, all of these industries have various levels of regulation. And, and by the way, they didn't at the inception of the industries. So again, we can look at history to see what happened with finance before there were regulations. The short version of it is it wasn't all that great. We can also, many of you recall, that in the early days of medicine, it wasn't all that great. I mean, people were, prescribing mercury to cure diseases. And, aviation, regulation is, important. In fact, it's in the news today. What's the appropriate way to regulate the aviation industry? So I find it hard to understand why the tech industry, which is now very systemically important, should be the only systemically important thing that we have that will work perfectly all by itself without some rules of the road. I don't understand how you would get to that point.
Earlier this year, you wrote a column in Wired calling for a kind of FINRA for tech, saying there was an opportunity for the industry to regulate itself. First of all, you've got a lot of friends at these companies. Did they listen? And is that enough?
Well, look, I think it's a great first step. I really think that, and regulating themselves doesn't mean a company regulating itself. What it means is a group of companies, in fact, representatives of the industry, being allowed by the government, without some government support, it would be a cartel. So being allowed by the government to work together to set common rules that would govern the behavior of all of the players. And so if you do it this way, an advantage would be that, look, the tech industry is evolving very quickly. I am not for stifling innovation. The industry participants themselves understand what's possible and what isn't possible better than maybe a government agency would. And so if the industry could get together and work collaboratively to set rules of the road, then maybe we would all be happier. And if they did that, that would be, I believe, better than waiting and then eventually people getting very upset and then the government doing something much more severe. So the advice I'm giving is to actually prevent over-regulation that would come if we do nothing.
And it seems like part of what we would need is a kind of algorithmic transparency, going back to earlier in the conversation, this group monitoring and managing how these invisible rules operate. But these companies are so secretive, right? What is their willingness to go and do this and to cooperate? Right.
Well, look, it's a tough question. I think that so I've grown up many years now in the world of finance, which is a very regulated business. And so I have never been bothered by this. I've been living in this world. I think having regulation in finance is a good thing. I think many of the regulations are designed to create a level playing field, instill trust, to create orderly markets. This is all very good. So I've never seen regulation as being a particularly big deal. And now, but on the other hand, I can imagine if you've grown up without any regulation of any kind, you may be a little bit more worried about what life would be like. And I think that's what's going on right now.
Another flashpoint is between privacy and security. So you have companies like Facebook saying, we're going to tie our messaging services together and we're going to encrypt them and you can be sure your communication's private. And then you have law enforcement and the FBI saying that's going to cripple our ability to protect society. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Well, I fall on the spectrum that in a democracy, we are able to ultimately make the rules. So society is not something that is created by some, closed room and you don't know what their, methodology and ideology is. Right here, we're supposed to have a democracy, so we get to decide what we want by voting. And so on issues concerning privacy, I have my own opinions, but they don't matter that much. We need to basically, as a society, decide what trade-offs we want.
Okay, wait, let me stop you right there. You're going to continue in a second, but you said people should vote, so we cooked up a poll. So please go to Bloomberg, STYT.com. Should U.S. tech companies be allowed to create secure, encrypted communication tools? So now continue with what you're saying, and we're going to get the vote.
We get to vote. And so let me tell you, before you vote, what needs to be considered here. So the trade-offs are, obviously we all want privacy, right? No one wants to have everything that you're doing just out there in the open. But on the other hand, if you have total privacy, maybe that might sound good, but it might lead to a lot of unintended consequences. I mean, it surely will make it harder to solve certain kinds of criminal activity, probes, and so forth. And so this is the trade-off. So we might be willing to have a greater level of abuse in our society. Maybe it will lead to more violence, maybe it will lead to more financial fraud, but maybe you're all okay with that trade-off because you value privacy so much, or maybe you're not. So this is the question.
Well,
so
it seems like this crowd is okay with the trade-off.
Yeah, I don't, is that the, so, yeah. Right. But on the other hand, of course, our views will change over time depending on what happens to our society. So the only thing I would say on this point is that we as a society should try to build the society that we want. We have agency in this thing. We shouldn't become detached from it. I don't think decisions should be made, critical decisions about how our lives are led should be made by unelected officials. It doesn't sound like a democratic way to do it.
David, we're close to running out of time. You're almost a founding member of the New York City technology community. I wanted to ask you about the health of the New York tech ecosystem.
Well, in the years that I've been here, I can't imagine how dramatic and wonderful the change has been. When I graduated from MIT in '91, I mean, really, the only tech jobs that you had in New York were at the big banks. And now it is an unbelievably vibrant tech community. The number of startups is absolutely remarkable. Cornell Tech, which I'm involved with, is helping to turbocharge the tech ecosystem here in the city by teaching entrepreneurialism. Look, the only thing that's at this point holding back additional tech growth, I think, is that it's becoming harder and harder to live in New York City. There are housing and transportation shortages. This is making places like Pittsburgh, which has Carnegie Mellon as a hub for its tech innovation, and other Austin, Texas, which is another vibrant tech area. So I worry that if we don't get our house in order in New York by making improvements to the housing situation and public transportation to make the place work better, this will stifle tech growth.
I will say this, I'm from San Francisco. You guys have electricity that works, so New York is looking pretty good right now. I want to end with a lightning round, okay? So underrated or overrated, okay? Autonomous vehicles.
Overrated.
Not sooner than you think.
Not sooner than
okay.
You think. And be a little bit worried when one of them is going down the road, and you get out of the way.
The gig economy, underrated or overrated?
Pardon?
The gig economy.
The gig economy is overrated.
Okay. A 5G? 5G?
5G is neutral.
Okay, how about these low Earth orbit satellites of the kind that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are pitching for universal internet access?
I think that's underrated.
Okay. Space tourism, are you going up?
I'm not going up, not interested. There are places on the Earth that I haven't been to. I'm looking forward to seeing from the ground to begin with.
Alexa, or let's call it, voice-activated personal assistants.
I absolutely, it's the best alarm clock I've ever had.
Oh, so you own, what do you have? What do you have in your home?
I have Alexa. I have both, actually.
Do you worry that those companies are listening in?
I tell it my secrets every morning. I probably do.
Okay.
I'm not overly worried, no.
Quantum computing. We learned last week that Google says it has achieved quantum supremacy.
Sort of. It's debatable.
Okay. Last question, underrated or overrated, the New York City subway system?
I prefer Tokyo.
Okay. So, I didn't get an answer there.
The New York subway system is the best way to get around in New York.
Okay. Okay. David Siegel from 2 Sigma, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.